Hope you all are having a nice evening. I'm going to take a few moments just to introduce a few folks who will be sharing information this evening, and then I will go through the agenda. So first, let me start by having folks who are the co-chairs, the SEAC co-chairs, introduce themselves. So co-chairs, if you'd like to come off camera or come onto camera and go ahead and introduce yourself to the group. Thank you.
Sure, thank you so much, Phil. My name is Connie Nepomuceno. I'm a mom of 2 kids. I have a 6-year-old daughter and I have a 9-year-old son that has autism. I'm an active advocate in the community. I started my advocacy journey because of these meetings when my son was little. And I enjoy it a lot. I enjoy so much coming into these meetings and learning and connecting with all of you. With that said, I don't know if Victoria or Amy, I see Amy waving. Amy, would you like to go next? Thank you so much for being here, everybody.
All right, am I unmuted now? Okay, I'm Amy Bloom. Happy to be here and see all of you returning, and I know we have some new folks joining us, so welcome. I have 2 students at Bethesda Elementary. One is a 5th grader who receives special education, we understand what everyone's going through, and we hope that this meeting can be helpful and productive and a way to connect. So thanks for being here, everyone.
Okay, and I apologize, I can't see everybody. Is Victoria in? All right, so we will go ahead and move forward. I will share the agenda, and then if Victoria jumps in, we will have her introduce herself. So this evening, we do have a great agenda for you. We're going to hear from representatives from the MCC PTSA Special Populations or Special Education Committee. So those folks are going to say a few words to you and share with you what their role is and how you may help contribute to their work and the work of the MCC PTSA Special Education Committee. We're going to have them speak to us this evening. We are then going to jump into our primary portion of our agenda this evening, and we're going to be sharing updates regarding compensatory recovery services. Last spring, we did share updates with you in terms of our initial foray into the delivery of those services and the discussions with parents regarding eligibility. So we're going to be updating you on where we currently stand in our process, where we stand in our professional development for our staff, and the steps moving forward. So that's our primary piece of our agenda. One piece that I do want to share with you this evening is that because of the way that this meeting was set up, we unfortunately don't have the benefit of the chat, so you may notice that. So we are going to be taking some live questions as we move through the agenda or as we move through the presentation. So we will be stopping at certain checkpoints, and you'll see where those checkpoints come in the presentation, and you can ask questions along the way there. So if you're searching for the chat, you can stop, but we will give you an opportunity to ask 2 or 3 questions as we move through, and then we will take some questions at the end of the presentation. If there's time remaining, we will discuss several announcements that we have from folks. We've been provided some information that we want to share with folks, some community information, and then we will move into networking if there's time remaining, and we will turn it over to our co-chairs to do some networking. If at any point in the presentation you have a question that you feel uncomfortable asking to the whole group, and you would prefer to ask that of the co-chairs so that they can pass it on to us, you can certainly do that during the networking session, and then they will certainly share that information with us, and we will get that back to the whole group or to you privately if that's what is most appropriate. I'm going to say a few words about public testimony, as I typically do, and then we will jump into public testimony. We do have 2 folks who have shared with us that they would like to share public testimony this evening. So during public testimony, we ask that you try your best to be concise and to use, typically around 3 or 4 minutes at most, so that we don't impact the rest of the agenda. We also ask that you do your best to respect the privacy of other students and other staff members, other parents, by not naming folks. The purpose of public testimony is for us to either hear commendations or for us to hear concerns that will help make us a better system. There may be situations when we are able to respond immediately to something that is discussed in public testimony, but in most cases, we will need to follow up with that person so that we can address the specific situation after we have an opportunity to take a closer look at it to get more information. So at this time, we have two folks with public testimony. Ms. Carrie Swan stated that she would like to share public testimony. Is Ms. Swan here?
Ms. Swan is here and I've asked her to unmute. So hopefully she's.
Got it. Thank you. My name is Carrie Swan, and I am the mother of a 6th grader, a 5th grader, and a 1st grader, all in the Montgomery Virtual Academy. And I am speaking tonight both as the co-chair of the Down Syndrome Network of Montgomery County's Education Committee, as well as personally as a concerned parent of a medically vulnerable special education student that is not meaningfully able to access virtual instruction. Families like mine have waited 1.5 years to hear how MCPS would balance the needs of our students to be in school, as well as to be as safe as possible despite the pandemic. And our families have struggled through months of virtual learning, watching our students regress socially and academically. We have protected our children as much as we are able, knowing that those with Down syndrome and many other health concerns are at high risk for severe illness and complications from COVID-19. And we have anxiously awaited MCPS's plans to mediate the risk of infection in schools and have lost sleep over the decision to return to school or stay virtual, both last spring and again this fall. The reality is there are a small but significant number of students for whom neither the in-person or the virtual options currently offered are appropriate. And for these students, we need an option in order to allow special education and high-risk students to return to school and improve the safety for those already in school, to improve measures to limit the risk of exposure, both for high-risk kids and those with high-risk family members, to fully implement all IEPs, to prevent the need for disruptive quarantines and school closures for special education students, and to ensure that students have access to the least restrictive environment as outlined in IDEA. The decision to reopen in-person learning to all students was a good one. The problem is that the return to normal plan has ignored the needs of many students who most need to be in schools. Students at high risk of severe illness and complications, those with a high-risk family member, and those whose families are simply uncomfortable with the premature return to normal despite our students being yet unvaccinated, had hoped to hear how classrooms would be spaced, how lunches and other large gatherings would be reimagined, and how vaccination would be required of all staff working with our students, how routine and robust screening would identify cases before they spread. We hope to hear what air quality measures had been implemented to reduce the risk of exposure to circulating virus, and how all of these measures would reduce both the risk of exposure and the need for disruptive quarantine and isolation as much as possible for our students. Having worked and volunteered in schools my entire career, I understand these are huge challenges. Nevertheless, they are what many students need in order to access a public education. One possibility to meet these goals would be to establish a small number of classrooms in parks and buildings, underused schools, or other county buildings that would allow MCPS space to strictly follow CDC guidance regarding 3 to 6 feet of social distance, to provide regular mandatory testing, to isolate students within small pods without commingling among classrooms and shared spaces, to maximize air quality and ventilation, and to provide specific metrics to families, to monitor for symptoms and high-risk behaviors. If exposure occurs, to allow students to return to class with regular testing rather than being sent home to quarantine, and to achieve inclusion through a combination of students with IEPs, medically high-risk students, and students who have a medically high-risk household member. We cannot do everything perfectly in a pandemic, but we can do our best, and what can be implemented across MCPS should be. What cannot be implemented across MCPS should still be implemented for those students who need it. The measures I've outlined would not only help minimize the risk of infection for the most medically vulnerable students, but would also serve to limit the disruption of quarantine and school closures. The information we have received from MCPS touches on many of these safety concerns, but the classrooms I have seen in pictures and in virtual open houses are set up with no space between desks. The CDC guidance on 3 to 6 feet of social distance in classrooms seems to have been frequently dismissed as impossible. Only testing students whose families opt in does not provide vulnerable students with the protection they need, and it creates too many opportunities for exposure, leading to periods of disruptive quarantine. We can continue to give principals and teachers the resources to improve the safety for all students, and we can give a smaller number of students at high risk of medical complications or academic disruption a safer environment in which to learn. Enrolling in the virtual academy was a hard and unhappy decision for our family, but it was the only one we felt was safe, as both the case counts and the risks to children rose with the Delta variant. For my special education student, who last year attended kindergarten in a virtual inclusion classroom at Highland Elementary in Wheaton, we watched and waited in eager anticipation for information on how school would reopen safely or how his IEP could be implemented in the virtual academy. Nearly 9 weeks into the school year, we are still waiting for an IEP meeting, and our related supports are inconsistent and inaccessible despite multiple deadlines coming and going. We are receiving effectively no special education support. I log into a first grade meeting, turn down the volume on lessons that are not appropriate for my child, and I teach him using a curriculum and materials purchased at my own expense. He is not being provided a free, appropriate public education, and he has not been since March of 2020. For many of us, the virtual option was and remains no option at all. Some families of students with health concerns have opted to homeschool rather than stay in a virtual setting that proved ineffective, but homeschooling is not doable for all families. Especially for students with special education needs, this is an unrealistic and inequitable solution. Other families of high-risk students opted to return to in-person learning, but remain very uncomfortable with the level of risk given the limited safety measures implemented in their schools. We have read state guidance and spoken to MCPS staff who have offered the suggestion of interim itinerant services, AKA home hospital teaching, in which a tutor and possibly IEP service providers might meet a student at home or another setting for a limited number of hours. And yet we now hear that these services too are being delivered virtually. The sheltered classroom model would allow for more efficient and effective delivery of services to those students who would otherwise qualify for IIS. It would allow more students to be in person and make academic progress. It would provide the peer interactions and models that are so important to children's well-being and development, and it would minimize the disruption of learning in periods of quarantine, allow more families to have their children safely at school so they can return to work, a fundamental point of equity and access for many families in our community. I urge MCPS to implement a sheltered classroom model or another model that meets the needs of many of our students better than the current limited options of return to normal or the virtual academy. Our children with health concerns, IEPs, and those from at-risk families deserve better. We are anxiously awaiting MCPS's plan to provide them a free, appropriate public education. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Swan. At this time, we want to hear from Ms. Shameen Williams. Ms. Williams, are you here for us to hear your testimony?
Was I just summoned?
Miss Williams,
You were summoned.
you were
Okay.
summoned.
Hi, good evening. And I'll be honest, I thought I was supposed to wait until the parent discussion. But I just have a comment and question. So my topic is on the transitional services that we have in place for those students that are turning 18 and or exiting the high school program. What I've noticed is that we have two off-site transitional programs, the CCC and a TTI. And I'm not sure if that information is being promulgated well enough throughout the schools. I'll first say that I just volunteered to be the special educator or the special ed volunteer, PTA volunteer at Paint Branch, at Cloverly, and at Briggs Cheney Middle Schools. So I'm speaking with those hats on. But I guess my question is, first and foremost, is leadership considering other options for students that may want to exit the program, or not, and maybe that's not the correct terminology, but students that no longer want to be in the high school environment once they turn 18, because they're quite frankly, they're cognizant of the idea of, once I turn 18 and I've done 4 years in high school, then it's time for me to move on to the next level of education or the next level of adulthood, if you will. So if there's only the CCC and the TTI that's available through MCPS, are there any discussions or efforts to try to open up more opportunities within those two programs, or other alternatives to CCC and TTI? And then my comment is, what I realized, going through the process myself, I have a 17-year-old, and I'm definitely not the one to point the blame at anyone, but I think this would just be a helpful consideration. When they pass out the CCC and TTI information, there's nothing in the pamphlets that say that you need to apply 1 year and at least 18 months in advance in order to meet the deadline for not the following year, but 2 years. So in other words, with me planning my transition, or with our transitional planning for my daughter, who's a senior, I would have had to contact the transitional office early last year in order to meet the January deadline, in order for her to start the program in 2022. And of course, that's something that no one would fathom, because when we apply for colleges, typically you have that year before in order to start the following year. So that's not something that anyone would even fathom. So if we could consider putting that information on the pamphlets, that, if you want this program and you're, and you're looking at a particular year to start, then these are the deadlines you need to consider. And I think that's my time.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams. And I know that Ms. Simone Guinness, our supervisor for transition services, is present here too. So she was listening to your testimonies. But thank you to both parents for sharing those testimonies. We have a little different option for our interpretation this evening, and I apologize. We've been using one of the options in Zoom on the control panel at the bottom in the past few meetings, but today we don't have that option available to us. So I want to work with Connie. Connie, if you can help me share this message, that if folks need Spanish interpretation, we do have a phone number that they can call to contact the interpreter. So, so Connie, if you could share for folks that need Spanish interpretation, you could take down this number and share with folks that they should call 301-526-7925. That's 301-526-7925 for Spanish interpretation. If you could share that now, it'd be great.
Buenas noches a todas las familias que están atendiendo en esta reunión. Le queremos hacer saber que lamentablemente no hay una opción para traducir en español por medio de la aplicación de Zoom. Tienen que llamar al teléfono 301-526-7925. De vuelta voy a repetir el número. Tienen que llamar para recibir interpretación en el idioma de español al teléfono 301-526-7925. Muchas gracias. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Connie. So at this time, we want to move on with our agenda, and I think it might be best. And Derek, I'm gonna be flexible here. You tell me if it's going to create problems for you to take down the presentation so we can see people's faces a little bit better for a moment. But I want to give the co-chairs of the MCC PTSA. We have our chairperson, Ms. Stephanie Frumpkin, and our vice chair, Rachel Tate, who are going to speak to you now. And I think it might be better for folks to be able to see each other this way. So go ahead and take it away, Ms. Frumpkin.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be speaking here. I really appreciate it. We had a meeting with Phil and Gwen. We had a meeting and I said, oh, it'd be great if we get more word out about our committee. And I see how responsive they were and inviting us, and the whole SEAC committee inviting us to speak. So thank you so much for hearing us and inviting us tonight. I do actually have a presentation, so I'm just going to share my screen. That's okay. So, and I would like to, unfortunately, Rachel Tate, I'm the chair, and Rachel Tate is the vice chair of the committee this year. And unfortunately, she is unable to be here tonight. So it is just me. So 1 second, please. Okay. I'm trying to figure out, sorry about this. Alrighty. All right. How do I do Zoom and present? All right, share screen. Okay. Gotta love technology, right? These days. Okay. All right, everyone see that? We're good?
Got you.
Okay, great. Let me go back. Okay. Okay, so I am here representing Montgomery County Council of Parent-Teacher Associations, MCCPTA, and we are the Special Education Committee. So we have a lot in common with, our committee has some, a lot of overlap with the SEAC committee, and we've been partnering with them, especially this year, I'm just really glad that we're able to be here tonight to talk a little bit about our committee and sort of what MCCPTA actually is. So start out with MCCPTA overview and then talk a little bit more about our committee. So again, I'm Stephanie Frumpkin. I'm the chair of the committee. And here's my email if you want to reach out to me. A little bit about me. I have 2 children. I have one in MCPS. I have a son. He's has disabilities. He's a twice exceptional child, and he's at Blair High School. And just by profession, I actually, Rachel and I were both both former MCPS teachers. I'm currently I'm an educational consultant, and Rachel actually is a teacher in a private school at this time. So let's move on. That's Rachel's information as well. Okay, so MCCPTA stands for the Montgomery County Council of Parent-Teacher Associations, which is the countywide umbrella organization for our local schools, PTAs and PTSA. So you're probably familiar with the PTA or PTSA in your school, which stands for Parent-Teacher Association or Parent-Teacher Student Association, which is, there's one at the state level, which actually is not the state level anymore. It's called Free State. That's a whole other issue. But in most states have a state level and there's national PTA. And so we are the county level PTA. And then each individual school has its own PTA or PTSA. And this is our mission, MCCPTA's mission. I really like our president, Cynthia Simonson. She reads this at every board meeting, and I really love it. It really sets the tone for our meetings, which is to make every child's potential a reality by engaging and empowering families and communities to advocate for all children. So we are an advocacy organization, and a lot of times PTAs, we think about bake sales and raising funds, which is all important, but by nature, we actually are an advocacy organization. So that in terms of the special education committee, we are a special education advocacy committee. Okay. So MCCPTA has many committees. These are our current committees. As you can see, I'm not going to read them all. You can see there's a lot of different things that we do. And you can see in bold here, the Special Education Committee, that's us. So, I mean, we're part of a big organization. We do a lot of things advocating for many, many things. And if you want more information, you can go to this page. Unfortunately, we don't have the chat now, but hopefully I can get some of these links that I'm going to be providing to you. And you can go in there and take a look at exactly more about MCCPTA leadership and the committees and our board of directors and kind of what we do. So the Special Education Committee's vision, as I said, we're our own little committee. I mean, within the broader organization of MCCPTA, and we act as a resource for the special education community, parents, caregivers, and staff, and share experiences in advocating for children to implement successful family school partnerships. And we continue to outreach to those who may not be connected with their school community. In terms of our co-chair responsibilities, for Rachel and myself this year, we help plan events and activities. We advocate for MCPS students with disabilities and their families. We raise issues to the MCCPTA Board of Directors. We hold quarterly meetings with MCPS special education staff. We collaborate with SEAC and other disability organizations. And each committee is tasked with coming up with priorities that they want to be focusing on for the school year. So these are our 5 advocacy priorities. So I'll just go through them. One is to increase training for all general education teachers to better understand high incidence disabilities such as ADHD, autism, anxiety, dyslexia, and how to better work with students who have these disabilities. Another one is to increase training for special education teachers and administrators so they have further knowledge and the tools they need to effectively comply with federal and state laws and MCPS policy. The next one is to increase the writing of measurable goals and objectives and providing data to parents. Next, to teach parents about their rights. And lastly, to build a network of special education representatives in each school to provide support, information, and resources to special education families and to advocate. I can't even read my thing here. Okay, was to advocate for families in the schools. So we are seeking representatives. We are in the process of recruitment. Currently, we have 48 special education representatives. Well, actually, we have more than 4. We have some co-chairs, and we have representatives in 48 schools, and we are actually looking to recruit more. And if you're here and you want to get involved, it's a really amazing thing you can do is to help the families in your school community. And also, we work together. We have quarterly meetings for our special ed reps, or maybe even more, and we have work groups that so we can work together in terms for advocacy within your local school and as a county to help families with disabilities. So if you're interested, we would love to have you. And our goal is to have at least one in each school to help support families of students with disabilities and advocate for their needs. And it's a very flexible position. You can use your talents, whatever that is, to help advocate. If you like planning events, you can plan events. If you are good with technology, you can create an amazing website with resources. If you're good at advocacy, you can be working with your PTA president and maybe the principal and advocating for students. Whatever it is, your talents can shine in this position. So we would really appreciate to have at least one in every school. So one thing we do is we have a quarterly speaker series. And then these are experts in the field of special education. Our mission, our priority this year is knowing your rights. That's our focus. So that's our first quarterly speaker was on the foundations of the special education process. That was by Monica Martinez, a special education advocate. Next quarter, we're going to be having Brian Gruber and Kimberly Glassman, who are special education attorneys, and to be determined for quarters 3 and 4. But again, we're focusing on know your rights for this year. Last year, we had some other topics. We had a special needs navigator, Eric Jorgensen. We had a certified educational planner. Judy Bass spoke for us, and we had Nicole Joseph, an education attorney, and she spoke on compensatory education, which is what you're speaking on that today. So that's great. And the special education communications initiatives are here. And again, I'm sorry, I can't provide the actual links for you, but hopefully I can at a different time. But we have a new special education committee Facebook group, which I'm very excited about because it's nice to really be able to engage with our community. So please join that. And we can provide information for you there. We also have a new YouTube channel. And anytime we have a quarterly speaker, we're putting it on the YouTube channel for you to be able to view. If you weren't able to be there live, you can always look or refer back to it. I began a lot of requests from our last speaker, from Monica Martinez. Everyone's like, oh, you know, I want to view it. I missed it, or I want to watch it again. It was really good. So if you didn't get a chance, please visit our YouTube channel. And we also have some Know Your Rights videos that we're producing this year. And this is our website. I have to admit, is a little outdated, but that is our goal. That's our next goal, is to update our CPTA special education webpage. Another really amazing thing that we do every year, it's been a little difficult in the pandemic, but we do normally have MCCPTA has special education recognition awards, which recognizes the incredible special educators, support staff for special education services, and students. So anybody that you feel who is doing an amazing job in their role as a special education teacher or para, or even volunteering, families who volunteer, or students who are helping other students, you know, please, we'll get more information about that later. Rachel Tate, our vice chair, is organizing the awards this year, so stay tuned for that. We usually have, at normal times, we have a ceremony. It's really special. I'm not sure what we're doing this year. And that's really just about us. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me or Rachel. Here are our emails. And we just really appreciate if you can get involved. We really need you. All the families, you know, the special education community has a vulnerable population, and we really need your help to help with advocacy and supporting them. So get involved and please reach out. And thank you so much for having me tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And, you know, I'll put a plug in for folks, as Stephanie did, to, if you're able to participate in the special needs committee at your local school as a part of the PTSA at your local school, so that we have representation there. We'd love to have representation at all of our schools, as Stephanie mentioned. And Stephanie, if you're comfortable sharing that presentation with Ms. Strobel and I, if you want to email that to us, we can send that out through our distribution list and share that with folks on who participate in these meetings, who are on our distribution list, along with the other resources that we're going to send out.
That'd be fantastic. Thank you. Will do.
Happy to do that. Thank you again.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. At this point, I want to introduce or allow Victoria Aiello, hopefully one of our co-chairs who was unable to introduce herself earlier, to jump in and say good evening before we move on to our next portion of our. You're on mute, Victoria.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Phil. And I'm sorry, I was experiencing some video and issues with my video with my mic before, but good evening, everybody. My name is Victoria Aiello, and I am one of the SEAC co-chairs. I have a child in special education. She's at BE. I think maybe you have all already talked about this, but I also want to say that you can reach the co-chairs at any time. We have a website and there are all the contact information of the co-chairs on the website. So feel free to reach out whenever you have a question or concern, or you just want to share any good experience. Feel free to reach out. I also want to quickly thank everybody attending tonight, and Ms. Williams and Carrie for your testimony and the presenters tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Victoria. And Derek, before you go back to the full presentation, I just want to introduce the folks that will be sharing information about compensatory recovery services this evening, so you can see their faces before we take up the screen with the PowerPoint. So this evening we'll be hearing from myself and Dr. Gwendolyn Mason. Dr. Mason, if you want to wave. And we'll be hearing from Julie Hall. There she is. We'll be hearing from Diana Wiles, our new supervisor for our resolution and compliance unit. And from Jonathan Langsman, who is our coordinator supporting the delivery and professional development around compensatory recovery services. So that'll be our group that will be presenting the information for you this evening. If you missed it earlier, we do not have the chat option this evening. So what we'll be doing is stopping at key moments within the presentation. It'll be obvious in the presentation where we'll be stopping to take questions. We'll take questions about that section of the presentation as best we can, and we will give folks an opportunity to come off camera. If you could use the reaction button in the lower right corner to raise your hand. If you click on that reaction button, you'll see that there is a place your hand, and you can then Jen Strobel will invite you to ask a question. So Jen will be selecting 2 or 3 folks to ask a live question, and then at the end we will take some additional questions before we end that session. So at this time, Derek, if you want to pull up the presentation.
Excuse me 1 second. It looks like the chat is actually working now. I'm just letting you know. I see it. Looks like it's working. I don't know if you knew that.
I'm not seeing it on my screen, so maybe others are.
You see that? I just wrote hello.
So we'll go with the process. We'll go ahead with the process I described. I'm not seeing it on my screen. I apologize. Okay, so Derek, if you want to pull up the presentation. Move on to the next slide. Thank you. Okay, so Dr. Mason.
Well, thank you so very much, Phil, and to all of these SEAC attendees. Thank you so very much for this opportunity to talk to you about a very important topic regarding your children and the need to make certain that as a district, we ensure that you are aware of the processes we're using to determine eligibility for compensatory recovery services. So we will begin this evening by ensuring that you receive a definition. And I was asked by one of our SEAC co-chairpersons to make sure that we use language that is family friendly. And so Diana Wiles will be talking about that segment, utilizing very family friendly language that will enable us to better understand that process. We'll also understand the legal requirements for compensatory recovery services. We'll discuss the process for convening meetings and discussions with you regarding your child's eligibility for those services. And we'll have a discussion that I'll present this evening about analyzing data that helps to make those determinations about compensatory recovery services. And most importantly, who is again new to the Department of Special Education, Jonathan Langston, who was introduced by Phil. He's the new coordinator for compensatory recovery services, and he will be working with many of you as family members to make sure that you are linked to providers that can support your children if they are in fact found eligible for services. So we're going to proceed now to the next slide with legal foundations, and Diana Wiles will now take this part of the presentation. Thank you.
Good evening. Again, my name is Diana Wiles. I am the new supervisor for the Resolution and Compliance Unit. And it's my pleasure to be with you this evening to provide this information so that we can work collaboratively as a school system and with you as parents. Next slide. What are CRS? Compensatory Recovery Services are for students who receive special education and related services, but who, due to the COVID-19 related closures and virtual learning, may not have made the expected progress on their IEPs. All CRS services will be provided outside of the regular school day so that your students will receive the services that are identified on their IEP. Anything that they require as CRS would be outside of the regular school day. Next slide. Legal requirements for CRS. The U.S. Department of Education requires all school systems nationwide to consider any negative impacts that the pandemic closures have had on students with disabilities. The pandemic resulting closures of schools and sudden shift to virtual learning has certainly created challenges for our students with disabilities. So many of you as parents have seen the delays in providing services, the difficulties with fully implementing IEPs through a virtual setting, and some regression or loss of skills that your children may have occurred for your children. The purpose of CRS is to address those particular needs. Next slide. Who determines CRS? CRS is a team decision, just like any other decision in special education. Our teams are going to work with you to make a determination of whether or not CRS is required for your children. Your team could consist of the case manager, any related service providers for your student, counselors, transition support teachers. If your child is older and you would like for them to participate, they certainly should. Principals, assistant principals, or who they designate to provide administrative support. And central office representatives. You may have a need for someone from my unit, Resolution and Compliance, to participate, or someone from Phil's team in special education to help support the team. So oftentimes we will come and work with the school team that helps support them in making decisions. Additionally, just to clarify, CRS is not just for academic services. So your students who may have gotten speech and language or qualify for occupational therapy, the teams, along with you, with your support, will be discussing the extent to which CRS is required for all of those areas that your student gets services. Next slide. In what venue can the CRS decision be determined? We have identified two ways that school teams will contact you in order to have this discussion and make this determination in collaboration with all of the parents and guardians. The first way is through a written agreement with MCPS. In this case, your child's case manager will work collaboratively with you and with other team members, related service providers, general educators, anyone that has information on your child. And they would contact you in order to discuss the decision and make a determination about appropriateness for CRS services. That discussion will be documented in a prior written notice. And for those of you who have spent many years going to IEP meetings, you've received many prior written notices. So as you are aware, that document explains decisions that were made by the team, including yourself. That first process is not a formal IEP team meeting. However, if you were contacted by your child's school, you can certainly request a formal IEP team meeting if you would prefer to have a meeting versus a discussion with the case manager. However, the case managers will come prepared with information from team members. The second way is through a formal IEP team meeting. Some of you who have students who may be coming up on annual review dates, who may have reevaluations coming, will potentially have those discussions during those meetings, as opposed to having a meeting, a separate meeting, or having a discussion. So when you get those meeting notices, you will see that the purpose of the meeting may be to discuss CRS. Next slide. Factors to consider in the CRS process. CRS is being reviewed and determined for any student pre-K through high school, including those students who are placed in non-public schools who were in attendance with MCPS during the COVID closures from March 16, 2020 through June 30th, 2021. If you are a parent of a student who is new to MCPS for the 21-22 school year, we will work with you and your student's previous school system to gather information so that we can ensure that an appropriate determination is made. Mr. Jonathan Langsom, who you'll hear from later, will help to facilitate that process with your child's school. You will also receive a parent guardian CRS letter, which will be provided by your school's principal, and it will give you some important information and details on the process that we're discussing tonight. Your input and feedback is important to us, and we need your support to provide the appropriate services for our students. Next slide, please. At this point, we will pause and take questions.
At this time, if folks have their hand raised and they have a question that's specific to that section that was just reviewed for Diana, if you could, Jen, if you want to select anybody that may have their hand raised.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and ask Monica Martinez to unmute.
Hi there. So I know some folks have already had these discussions back in the spring and over the summer. Are those just going to continue to be honored as they were already discussed, or do they have to go through this process again?
Thank you for that question. It's an excellent question. Yes, if you have had a meeting already in the spring or the summer, that decision will stand. So if you have received notification that your child is eligible for compensatory recovery services, those services will be provided based on the decision that you all made in the spring. If you have not started those services and you have a question, contact the school. If the school is not going to be the provider, Mr. Langsom's office will be in touch with you.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I asked Julie Wright to unmute, please.
Hello, my question is similar to the last question. We've already had a meeting and determined a number of hours for compensatory recovery services. Is that conversation ongoing with the school if those services are starting to be provided, or if we've gotten to the end of those hours and the team reconvene and determine that the child needs more hours, or is that it?
So typically what happens when there's discussion regarding compensatory recovery services or compensatory services for any circumstance, the decision that the team makes would be the decision that would stand, which means if the number of hours was 20 hours, then you would complete those hours. If there's a question or issue, or you feel like your child is not making progress or requires more services, then you can certainly contact your case manager. However, the team will proceed with the services that were awarded at the time of the discussion.
Okay, I'm going to ask Stephanie if she'd like to unmute.
Yeah, thank you. So we had the discussion and we made a team decision on how many hours to be awarded. We have not currently received those hours. It was supposed to be delivered in the summer. That's what we were expecting. And that did not happen. So what do you recommend to do at this time?
The first thing I would say is to contact the school and find out from your case manager if there is anything in place that the services can be provided at the school. If not, I would reach out to Mr. Langston's office and find out whether or not there are supports in place through central office or through any other programming that may be available.
I wanted to add, I had raised my hand because I wanted to clarify Mr. Langston is here. And I want him to make note, I've said to him prior to tonight's meeting, there's any parent who's participating as a part of this process, and you are in that situation that Stephanie just described, you may contact Jonathan Langston. His information and contact information is going to become available. Work with him directly so he can help to facilitate that process. Because when I did return to the district in mid-August, I learned that there were families like yours, Stephanie, that had decisions made, but the services had not been provided. And so we're focusing like a laser right now and trying to make sure that we get those services coordinated. So thank you so much for raising that question.
Thank you all for your questions. So we're going to move on, and again, as we have an opportunity at the end of each section, folks want to raise their hand, you can speak your question live, and so we'll move on to our next session. I think we're moving on to Dr. Mason.
Yes. So again, this evening, I'm going to have the opportunity to talk to you about some of the factors that are considered when making a determination about eligibility for compensatory services. So we want to certainly look at if there's evidence of regression or an inability to have made progress during the period of time referenced in the previous segment of this presentation. We also want to make sure that we discuss if there was an inability to provide the accommodations during virtual instruction that again prohibited your child from making progress. We also want to address, missing services. There may have been a segment during that period where your child may not have received certain services that they would have received if in-person learning had been available. We also want to make certain that if there was any delay in the process where you as a parent did not receive any revisions to the IEP during that window of time, and ultimately any delay that may have occurred in scheduling so that your child during that period of time, would have received the necessary revisions to their IEP. So these are some of the factors in the process and the decision-making. Next slide, please. There are other factors as well, and these are some of the ones that you're most familiar with as parents. Certainly looking at report card grades and seeing how your child performed prior to the closure of schools in March 2020. And then of course, how your child performed up through the period of June 2021. We'll be taking a look at some of the learning skill grades, progress reports from IEPs, virtual service logs. These are, again, documents that are maintained and by not only special ed teachers, but related service providers, so that we have a sense of how your child was performing during that period of time that we're addressing. Work samples, it may have been Connie or Victoria who were talking to me about this presentation, and there was a comment. when parents are asked, what data do you have? Well, as Diana Wiles just simply said, work samples. You have evidence of what your child's work looked like prior to the closure of school, and you have evidence of what you observed during that period of time when schools were closed and in-person learning existed. So that's very important, good information for us to have. Informal observations, any notes that teachers may have maintained during that time. And then, of course, tier 3 interventions, as we know, are those evidence-based, generally reading interventions that your child may have received prior to the closure of schools. And then, of course, during the period of time when schools were closed, again, the impact on your child in terms of making progress in the use of an evidence-based intervention and reading may have been a significant factor. And then, of course, there's the evidence of learning data that I'm going to share a little bit of that with you this evening. If you wouldn't mind clicking on the parent-guardian guiding questions, please. One of the things that we have asked our teachers and related service providers to do in their discussions with you is to have some critical questions with you. And it really means that you have an opportunity at that time to really vocalize and give input. So for example, what are your students' strengths, interests, and hobbies? If applicable, did your student demonstrate progress in English, arts, or mathematics during this period? Or you may simply say, no, my child really did not, and go into that. Did your child demonstrate progress or not in the areas of social, emotional, or behavioral needs? Because I've often heard parents say that during that block of time, they really saw regression in those areas as well. So be prepared to talk about those things. In addition to that, we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to communicate with us if there were any challenges with motor skills and the ability to write or to perform other related types of motor, whether they be fine motor or gross motor skills, to help your child to make progress. And that any other additional information you wish to provide, and you see again where we reference work samples, so that you would have an opportunity to share. So it's going to be very important that you have this meaningful discussion with the team. We'll go back to the slide, please. Now there's a document called Appendix C, and this is a document that we've shared with our teachers. If you can click onto that. This document just really gives our teachers some more guiding types of questions that they can use. And it was adapted from Fairfax County Public Schools. This is something that Montgomery County introduced to its staff last spring, and we're going to continue to use this as we go through this process for this period of time. So it really does, again, provide some guiding questions, again, that school teams can use to talk to you. So we want this to be a very interactive process where your voice is heard in reference to the needs of your child. We can go back to the slide, please. Now let's go to the next slide. So now I want to talk to you about compensatory recovery services. Many times when parents for the first time hear about compensatory recovery services, they may make the assumption, or you may make the assumption, that it means having to compensate for every minute, every hour, and every second that your child was not, for example, in-person learning during the period of time that the pandemic interfered with the opening of school. I want to clarify one key fact for you. Compensatory recovery services does not mean that I'm going to provide every minute, every hour, every second of what your child would have gotten if school closures had never existed. But what it does mean is that as a parent and guardian, when you work with the school team, you'll be thinking about a period of time. Some parents have gone in with 10 sessions, 20 sessions, 30 sessions. I've seen a variety of ranges, and it's based upon the information that the school team has and your input. So don't expect, and I'm being very honest with you, that it would be minute for minute, hour for hour, or second for second. But it does need to be based upon what we would consider to be a reasonable remedy to provide your child with an opportunity to get that additional support beyond the school day, where they would have several weeks, a number of weeks. And as I said before, I've seen 16 weeks, 20 weeks, I've seen 30 weeks, I've seen the range. Now, I'll be honest, if you're going to ask me for 250 hours of compensatory recovery services, we'll probably have a conversation with you beyond the school-based team to discuss, why you're asking for that inordinate number of hours. But I just wanted to give you that as a frame of reference. If we go to the next one, please. One of the things that I wanted you to see, if you watched the Board of Education meeting in September, you may have seen this, but a lot of you are busy and you may not have seen this presentation. But one of the things our Board of Education was very interested in knowing is, where are our students in MCPS, given the impact of the pandemic and the impact on all of our students academically? So I thought that this evening, I made sure that you had an opportunity to see what it looks like for students with disabilities. So let me begin by saying something really upfront. We all know that prior to the closure of schools, we know that students with disabilities typically have not achieved at the same rate as their non-disabled peers. So when you take a look at, for example, grade 2, you'll see that prior to the pandemic, 48.7% of all second graders at that time had met the standards for the district. But notice the difference since we've returned back, where we have a drop of 23.3 percentage points, down to only 25.4% of our second graders being at a level of what's called literacy readiness. So that tells me right from the start that for our elementary school age students with disabilities in the area of reading, we could clearly see that there's been a significant impact to our students. And so be prepared if your child has IEP goals and objectives in the area of reading to engage in that rich discussion about where your child is. If you take a look at grade 5, you also see again a significant dip, not as great as grade 2, but there's still a dip. And then when you take a look at grade 8, isn't it interesting that it went up by 0.7? Well, all I can say is this: that's the aggregate. That's the whole group of 8th graders with disabilities. But individual decisions will be made about your children. So even if you have a child in middle school, the decision about whether or not your child was impacted as a middle school student in grade 8 or grade 6, those discussions have to be made individually. But I wanted you to see the big picture. Take a look at grade 11. Not a huge dip, but still a dip. So even for high school students in the area of literacy readiness, we expect, although this is the data on an aggregate or big scale or wide scale, individual discussions have to be held if your children continue to have goals and objectives in the area of literacy. If we could go to the next slide, please. This one reflects mathematics. Take a look again at grade 2 in the area of mathematics. The dip is not as great as it was in the area of reading. And the dip for grade 5 is a little bit greater in the area of mathematics for our elementary age students in terms of the impact and what they look like at this time. So this gives you an idea as a parent, as you get ready to go into a meeting, and your teachers have all seen this information because we've trained them on this information. This is new, current data about who our students are and what they look like right now. If your child has goals and objectives in the area of mathematics, you have a sense now of where our students are as a district. Look at grade 8, a continued dip in that area. So at the middle school level, please go in if your child has goals and objectives in math in the middle school level, expect to have a conversation and look for all of the data that the school team will provide. We've given those school teams tremendous guidance about being prepared to discuss the data about your children. And for grade 11, isn't it interesting that it went up just a tiny bit, but just the same? It is still an area of concern for our students. So here's the bottom line. Special education students, we know nationally were impacted. We know that there is literature about it, The U.S. Department of Education published a document in reference to the impact of the pandemic. I reviewed that and shared that with the Department of Special Education when I returned back to the school system in August. So we know that there's the impact, and this is why we must have these meetings and work on the delivery of compensatory recovery services. If we go to the next slide, I'm prepared to take a few questions before we go to the next segment of our presentation.
Okay, Jen, anybody with their hand up? We can take 2 or 3 questions before we move on.
I don't see any hands, but I was giving a little bit of wait time.
Okay, well, listen, you know, if you don't have a question, it's fine, but you know how to reach me. And that means each and every parent who's on this, in this meeting, you can always email. So I look forward to it, but I just wanted to know where we are as a district, and we have a lot of work to do to work with our students. If we can go back to the presentation, please. All right, and so Julie Hall is going to present this important information that many of you in a leadership capacity have asked me about. And so Julie, thank you so much for taking it on at this time.
Yes, good evening. Accountability is essential for compensatory recovery services process. As a result, MCPS has designed a data collection tool for our staff and providers to document CRS eligibility decisions, types of services, and the completion of those services. As part of the data collection tool design, the Office of Special Education pulled student data sets straight from the Maryland Online IEP. This data included 19,613 public and 581 non-public students. And these are preloaded into our data collection tool. The process for collecting the data began last year, and from the previous data set, we were able to document 2,476 students who were identified as ineligible or the parents had declined the services. Our school staff is now proceeding to enter that data and will continue to do that throughout this year. Although the final deadline is in June 2022, we're required to submit quarterly reports to the Maryland State Department of Education to demonstrate our system's progress throughout the year. And so schools will be using this data tool to enter that information for their current caseload. Next slide, please. The following are important dates to remember as it relates to CRS data collection. And these dates are, you can see, are staggered throughout this school year. Schools will keep these in mind as they are trying to complete all of their discussions with parents and then completion of the CRS services. There is little blackout periods throughout the year because my office will be reconciling that data and reporting on it to the State Department of Education. It is cumulative, so we anticipate that June 3rd deadline in 2022 for all of the data to be entered for our special education students, and it will be complete. And so my office will be compiling that, and we'll be sharing the data sets during those quarterly time periods. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Lynch, who's going to be talking about next steps.
Thank you very much, Julie. Before I get into my slides, I'll start by giving you a quick update and saying that, you know, we've been very busy in our office the last few weeks, training all of the staff, doing a refresh for all of our professionals who will be having these discussions with staff, with parents who have yet to have that compensatory recovery services eligibility discussion. We've trained our elementary teachers, and today was the second training for our secondary teachers. And we will continue to provide professional learning opportunities for our staff members and provide them with all the resources that they need in order to have these discussions. So I'm going to share the next steps with you, and these are next steps that really involve you as parents in this conversation. So if we go to the next slide, please. So the staff members were all trained and they began this process, many of them last year, but for those of you who have not had this discussion yet, staff members were trained to reach out to you, to contact you, to have that initial discussion about the compensatory recovery services, a meeting or conversation. And as Diana Wiles mentioned earlier, when they do connect with you, that's your opportunity to share with them that you would prefer if you would rather have this discussion in the context of an IEP meeting, to make that clear to them. And they have been trained then to transition that discussion into an IEP meeting where it can be conducted in that venue. Behind the scenes, the school-based staff members are going to be working hard to review all of that student performance data that Dr. Mason shared with you. We've given them a tool, we call it Appendix B. And if Derek, you could pull that up for me at this time. And essentially what it is a template. It's a data gathering tool that allows the staff members, if you could scroll down, Derek, the staff members an opportunity to do what Dr. Mason mentioned as that impact analysis. So she used the word impact several times. Go down one more page for me. That first slide gives it, or first page there, gives the teacher an opportunity to document the basic information about your student and their IEP and what their IEP documentation consists of. But then you can see here that it gives them this tool to document that impact analysis using all the data that's available and applying it to the different goal areas, listing the data sources, and looking at where that regression may exist. Okay, if we could go back to the slides. Thank you, Derek. The case manager for your student will be collaborating with all of the other service providers as well to pull that information together. And then they'll be sending you, the parent, any of the relevant information that will be reviewed or discussed. Next slide. It's the role of the case manager also to pull the service providers together and make sure that they are available for that IEP meeting, or they're available to gather to pull that data together, which will be then shared with you through that discussion. They will then hold the IEP meeting or the discussion with you involved. And that again is your opportunity, as Dr. Mason mentioned, to provide your input using those guiding questions. Those questions have also been shared with our staff members. They should be going through those questions with you so that you have an opportunity to provide a lot of input to this process. They're going to document this compensatory recovery services discussion on the prior written notice, and we've given them some resources to help with that process. And then they're going to complete that those documents and upload those to your student's IEP. Next slide. As always, we will follow up with you after those meetings to share all the documentation, the 5-day verification documentation, the prior written notice. I apologize for not spelling that out, but prior written notice is that document that essentially summarizes all of the decisions that were made throughout the course of that IEP meeting discussion. They're going to share with you that Appendix B data collection tool, and then they're going to go through that process of completing the compensatory recovery services data collection that Julie Hall just shared with you. Next slide. We are asking our schools to complete these conversations throughout the course of the year and to have those eligibility discussions held prior to the end of the third quarter, March 31st. As we said, many of you may have already had this discussion. And as Diana Wiles mentioned, many of you may be having these discussions as one of your annual reviews comes up or a reevaluation planning comes up that is already scheduled for your student. Next slide. At this time, if folks have any questions for me about the steps in that process, Jen, I do see a hand up there, Jen. So if you want to select a few people, that would be great.
I just asked Laura Mitchell to unmute.
Hi, I'm just wondering, as I saw a brief glimpse of the form that you're going to be using, I noticed that, well, the only things I saw were academic related. So how much weight is given, and are they looking at the social emotional and the social skills and the regressions that may have happened there, or lack of progress even in that IEP as well, where that's appropriate?
That's a great question, Laura. If you looked at the Appendix B that I had flashed up there, it had goal areas impacted. So it wasn't specific only to academics. I know that a lot of the data that we referenced is around the academic areas, but the charge of the team is really to look at all those different goal areas that are in your student's IEP, to look at regression for any of those goal areas, and that is how folks are being trained. So they would need to bring in some other data sources to help inform that conversation. Great question.
I asked iPad 7 Rachel to unmute, please.
Hi, thank you. My question is there a deadline for having that initial conversation? Is that June 2022, or is it earlier than that?
We provided our schools with the deadline of the third quarter, the end of the third quarter, which is March 31st. We, as we said, we've already had these discussions with a large number of families, and we will be moving through those discussions for the remainder of the fall and into the winter. But we expect folks to be able to complete that process, that eligibility discussion, by the end of the third quarter. And as I mentioned, it may take place, in the context of your students' IEP meeting or review meeting that may be already scheduled. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jonathan Langston, who is going to speak about the different coordination of services and the different pathways that may be selected for your students to receive those services if they're determined eligible. Jonathan?
Thank you. Sorry about that. I was trying to unmute there for a second. So thank you, Derek, for helping me do that. I just wanted to start off by saying I'm really excited to be here. I'm really excited to meet you all in this group. Being the coordinator of compensatory recovery services is a joy of mine. It's like a dream job for me. I love connecting with parents and families. It's been a passion of mine for my whole career. I've been in special education for almost 30 years. I don't look that old, but it's possible. And I'm very excited to be here. What I want to do tonight is review the different pathways that we've created in delivering our compensatory recovery services. I want to teach you and show you the different options that we're creating, and talk about the partnerships we want to build with you, and really in supporting you and your students and you and your kids, really. So I'm going to get started. So we're creating multiple pathways to provide services, and there's really two main levels that the services can be provided. You see four categories here: school managed services, CRS by appointment, the George B. Thomas Saturday School, and high dosage tutoring. The two levels I was talking about is services being identified and delivered at the school level by school staff that we are identifying at the school level where your child is at school. But we will have many instances where the school team is finding somebody eligible, but having a hard time finding a provider. We are building a very large bank of providers here at central office, mostly our Montgomery County Public Schools teachers that are volunteering to work outside of their duty day to provide services. So if we are unable to find a provider at the school level, I want to make sure you guys know and have confidence that we will be able to match your child with a provider and move forward in that way. So the school team, as they're communicating with you and we're going through the eligibility process, they're going to discuss if they're able to find providers at the school level, or if they need to refer you to our office to what we call CRS by appointment, matching you guys with a provider and working in a partnership with that provider. I'm going to review the other options, the George B. Thomas Saturday School, what that means, and high dosage tutoring as we move forward. Thank you, Derek. I want to first talk about the school managed option. It's kind of our first line where you're in the eligibility process and the school team, you guys have identified hours, you guys are ready to move forward, and the school team is able to match providers from members of that school. So in that instance, you would be matched with that provider. You would communicate with that school member staff member, and you would discuss a delivery option that makes sense and is comfortable for you all on your end and your child and the provider. Some options for that would be to receive services before or after school. We are opening regional service centers that'll be sprinkled around Montgomery County, and I'll go into that in a little bit, where you can access a provider, your provider, and you can meet at one of these centers, one of our schools, and services can be provided on a Saturday or a Sunday. You and your provider might decide that a public library near the house or somewhere that makes sense is a nice place to meet and have services provided. And then we're also looking at public spaces for community-based learning, and those spaces can also be accessed outside of school hours, weekends, evenings, school breaks. It is our intent, and we will be built to be able to provide services from pre-K all the way up through 12th grade. And then also there's transition services. We've heard from some of that tonight. And I know we're working with transition as well to address needs of students that are even in that upper level or need to work on those skills. So that outlines our school managed approach. If we could switch slides, please. So the next option is for the school team to request for central office CRS, basically asking us to support them, the eligibility, and matching a provider with your family. The main options within that option are CRS by appointment, like I've kind of described. That's the provider communicating with you, you guys forming a partnership and discussing the best delivery option that makes sense, again, for you guys and your child. There is the George B. Thomas Saturday School. I'm excited for this option. This is a program that's going to occur on Saturdays. I'll go into more details about that in a couple of slides, but we're excited to have that as part of our CRS delivery options. And then you also see summer 2022 delivery. And I'm hoping within your discussions with your school teams, with your families, you're deciding on the best pathways to get services delivered. And I want you guys to think that maybe it's better to have services delivered sometime next summer when it makes sense, of course. Maybe with the rigors of the school year and the busyness of life, it might make sense to try to deliver services or have that as an opportunity for next summer. And I'll be able to go into some more details about that as well. We can switch, please. So CRS by appointment, which we just talked about, again, would be delivered at a regional service center in a public area, and there's also a virtual option. So in some cases, it'll make sense for a provider and a family to say, hey, we can do some virtual sessions to work on some of the skills. We can also use a variety. We can use our service center and also virtual if we choose to. We can also use a public library. I guess what I want you guys to hear is between you and the provider forming that partnership, you might decide the regional service center makes the most sense. You might decide a library makes the most sense. You might decide that virtual instruction makes some sense. So that'll be, a discussion that you guys have and we think critically about. If we go to the next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about our regional service centers, their locations, and the process and how we would engage in that. So we're going to have centers throughout the county. Like I said, we're going to have Little Bennett Elementary School, which is up north in our northern part of the county. We're going to have two schools centrally located here in the Rockville area. We have the Rock Terrace School and we have Julius West Middle School, and they're kind of on either side of the city here. And we'll have Eastern Middle School, which is on the other side of University Boulevard and can hopefully be easier access from folks that live out that way and providers that are from living in that area. I also want to mention that the Rock Terrace School will be a comprehensive site. Our goal is to be able to provide a very wide range of services at the Rock Terrace School. Some of our students will need a higher level of service, such as access, maybe special equipment, and enhanced staffing. So we are looking at the Rock Terrace site, Rock Terrace School, to be a location where we can work with students that might have a higher level need. In the process, you're going to work with your provider and you're going to identify a location that makes sense. And that provider will go ahead and block off the appointment times that you guys agree upon. The service centers are designed to be open from 8 a.m. till 4 p.m. and the blocks will be blocked off for about an hour. A service provider could block off more time if needed, and also block off several weekends if needed. So if the agreement is, let's do Saturdays at 10 a.m. at Eastern Middle School, the provider is going to go in and mark up that calendar so that space is reserved. We will have staff at our service centers supporting families at arrival and supporting the entire process. We'll have a coordinator on site and some other staff assisting us with making sure that the operation runs smoothly. It will also be a point person and available in supporting all the efforts of our service centers. I also want to mention that we will have transportation available for our service centers. If we can give transportation more than 10 days notice, our intent is to provide door-to-door service to and from a regional service center when needed. If a parent can bring a student, we appreciate that. But if families need transportation, please engage us on that and allow us to make that request. And we're pretty confident that we'll be able to provide door-to-door on the weekends to one of our regional service centers. If we could switch to the next slide, please. So you heard me mention earlier the George B. Thomas Saturday School. This is a virtual only option. And one of the really nice things is we'll have a coordinator on staff there welcoming our families into that process. It is a rolling admission process. So an example would be is if you had your meeting in January and we identified the George B. Thomas Saturday School, your child could start right away. There's not an official start date or end date. It's going to be rolling. Students can be added and start at any time, and they can also come out of that once services have been rendered and completed. So I really like that setup. It's comfortable, it's flexible, but it is only virtual. And I do want to acknowledge that I think a lot of our students are receiving CRS because the virtual option maybe wasn't able to meet their needs and we experienced regression. But in some instances, it might make a lot of sense and be a great setup for a child and a family. The services offered at the George B. Thomas Saturday School are general academic services for reading, language, arts, and mathematics for grades kindergarten through 8, and English and mathematics for our high school students. We are able to request a specific math level based on a student's needs, such as calculus, trigonometry, and the ones above that I'm not so aware of. Our goal would be to match a provider that is able to teach that subject to that child. So we'll be able to have those details and match that probably with no problems. If we could move on, I want to talk a little bit about summer 2022 delivery. You heard me mention it earlier. I am excited that we're building, I think, some pretty dynamic options for next summer. I don't want to go into a lot of details because we don't have them built yet. And I don't want to say things until we're really structured and ready to present them to you all. But I have a lot of confidence that we'll be able to offer services in a variety of ways next summer. If you think that's a comfortable option for you and your family, I encourage you to explore it. And if you'd like to discuss this option or any of these options with me as you guys learn about eligibility and start to think about what makes sense, I welcome your calls, I welcome your emails, and I'd love to talk to each of you individually at some point in this process. I want to go back into transportation real quick. I do want to mention that at the secondary level at our middle and high schools, we can request what we call an activity bus to transport a child after CRS after school. It is not a door-to-door service, but our activity buses can return students to their communities and oftentimes close to their homes. So that is available when it's comfortable and appropriate for your child, and that is a request that we can make. It's the same standard on both ends. We need to give at least 10 days notice to make sure we can secure a driver and have a bus there. If we are ordering transportation for your child, you will be contacted by the transportation folks, and they will clarify with you pickup times, drop-off times, addresses, contact info. So it should run pretty smoothly. Once a request is made, you'll be contacted by folks from transportation. I've said a lot, and I'm guessing I rushed. I didn't mean to. If I did, I apologize. I'm guessing there's going to be some questions about our delivery options. And even if we don't have them tonight, I know that they will be generated with your families as you guys move forward. I want to say again, this is a joy for me. And it's my intent to welcome you into this process and to work with you personally and provide the best services that we can. So I encourage you to please email me or call me and discuss with me anything you'd like to. I'm here for you. It's a partnership between us. And like I said, I look forward to this, and I'm excited to be in this role with you all. And at this time, we can take some questions.
I think folks can see why Mr. Langston is in his position. He's really excited about this role, and he has a lot of experience in communicating and partnering with families. So we are excited about having him in this position. And so at this time, if there's any questions, Jen, I'm not sure. I do see a couple of raised hands. So we want to select some folks, Jen, to ask questions of Mr. Langston.
Yep. Amy Bloom, can you go ahead and unmute?
Yeah. Thank you to all the presenters. And if this was covered, I apologize. I had to go help my kids with something for a minute. I was wondering if families have or can have the option of receiving compensatory services by just adding them to current IEPs. So if, for example, you have 30 minutes a week with an occupational therapist, could you simply just up that to, you know, an hour for students who don't need a ton but need it? I think it might be helpful for families to just have it added into the regular school day. Is that an option for families?
Diana, would you answer that question, please, because of the technical guidance regarding the way the law describes comp services?
Sure. So because compensatory services are used either for recovery or regression, they are services that are provided outside of the regular school day. So what the team is looking at is not the services that are currently being provided during a regular school day. They're looking at the services that may have either been missed or were provided, but were not provided in a way where the student made the progress that was expected during the period of the closure. In order to make sure that the IEP is implemented to address the needs that the student currently has, the compensatory recovery services have to be provided outside of the regular school day.
Diana.
Do we have any other hands?
Questions at this time? Any other questions at this time, Jen? Do you see anybody? I'm sorry, I'm trying to scan the screen.
Stephanie, go ahead and unmute.
Thanks. Just a follow-up on what Amy asked. So if it were a high school student and they had a lunch hour, would that be possible for them to make it up during that time?
Diana?
Sorry, I'm muted. The issue with that would be a couple of things. First, the student's lunch is still part of their regular school day. And we certainly would not want to overload a student that, you know, during that time where they get an opportunity to socialize and de-escalate and prepare for their next class. But the other issue with that is that the providers who might be classroom teachers would not be available during their lunch times.
Okay, thank you. Another question. I saw a lot of great programs that Jonathan had shown, and a lot of them look very, you know, in the academic realm, and kind of back to what Laura was saying, you know, what about, you know, social emotional. So like, I'll just give you an example of my child. The compensatory education services that we are receiving are related to social skills. So that seems like that's a harder thing. So to coordinate, because it's not going to be one-on-one. How is that being coordinated? Yeah,
Jonathan?
thanks. I love your enthusiasm, Jonathan.
I see Gwen wanted to say something first. Gwen, no? Okay. Okay. So I love this question, and I thank you for it because it needs to be talked about tonight, and I didn't speak of it yet. So thank you for bringing this up for all of us to discuss right now. We are going to have abilities to focus on social skills, socialization, interacting skills, problem-solving skills, and all the things that I know our students need to work on that aren't necessarily traditionally given in a classroom. We are going to be able to have providers connect with our families and set up opportunities for students to be in small groups, to be in situations where socializing, playing, communication skills will all be addressed. I can give one example right now. As we're building, we have a provider that's matching themselves with 5 families, and they plan to meet at a Montgomery County Public School playground with a planned curriculum to address the social skills needs of those students. To me, that's an exciting and dynamic approach to providing this type of instruction. So that's just one example that we've currently built. And I know that other ideas and other examples are going to come. But I thank you for that, because I know that many of our students have goals in areas of behavior, socialization, communication, play, all those aspects that students can get in school just naturally, by interacting with each other and not necessarily it being heavily structured, such as playgrounds and those types of interactive abilities. So it is our intent to build those opportunities. And I can say right now that we have many providers excited to build those types of opportunities. And we are able to build small groups. So it's not just a one-on-one situation. We can have groups of 5. We could have groups of 10. So I get excited with the creativity that we can try to build to get to all of it, get to everybody, and have a pathway for all of that learning and all of those experiences.
Thank you.
Okay, ask Beverly to go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. I just would like, excuse me, I may have missed it previously, but is there a slide that has contact information for all of the presenters?
And if you would prefer to email us, our emails are on the MCPS website. If you just go to special education in the search engine there, but you can certainly contact us by using those phone numbers there, and we will get back to you, or we will schedule a time to discuss whatever your question is. And Derek, if you could go down to Jonathan's, there you go.
The next question is
Hello?
from the next
Hi.
question. Okay, go
Hello,
ahead.
can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm not sure if you guys addressed this, but students who were in private schools but had, I think it's called FAP, or receiving services, had an IEP, were receiving, let's say, speech therapy or other services from Montgomery County, do they qualify for CRS?
Sounds like you're referring to students who are in private religious schools. Is that right?
Not necessarily religious schools, but per parent choice were placed in the private school, not placed by Montgomery County, but were in private schools, but were receiving services through Montgomery County for speech or other things. Do they get assessed for CRS or not?
Yes, all students who have an IEP, every student are a part of that compensatory recovery services discussion.
I see Connie's hand.
I asked Connie to unmute.
We're not hearing you, Connie.
Connie, are you able to unmute?
She's trying.
Connie, I'm going to go to Monica and then we'll come back to you. Monica, go ahead.
Yep, thank you. For those families who had to ultimately hire someone to come in and work with their kid during online learning, whether they needed a one-to-one to sit with their child during Zoom sessions or reteaching things, is there a venue for seeking compensation, reimbursement through the school district for those hours? And if so, what is the process?
Diana, if you're available, if you could respond to that question for me, please.
So the resolution and compliance unit is working with schools. If you have that request, once you have your CRS discussion with your school, if you've already had that discussion, you can reach out to our office and we will discuss and coordinate with you and the school team a discussion with regard to whether or not reimbursement is appropriate remedy.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just add that I will assure you that it was part of our training to use Diana Wiles' office as a resource if those conversations do come up, during the discussion. So thank you. Are we seeing any other questions there, Jen?
No, there's no more questions. And Connie, if you're unable to, oh, wait, we do have a question from Sharon's iPhone.
All right, Sharon.
I was just, this is the first time it actually let me do this. So this is Sharon from the Department of Recreation. And I just wanted to poke you to say before we wrap up and turn it over to the parent portion, I have a couple of really exciting things to share.
All right, thanks, Sharon.
Thanks.
We'll get to you before we move into the networking, but I think we might have one more question. Connie, were you able to come off mute there?
You guys hear me now?
Go ahead, Connie.
Yay! I can't believe I get excited about little things like that. But anyways, I just wanted to follow up with the question that Ms. Beverly Hassel had regarding the contact for MCPS. I just want to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded and it will be uploaded in the SEAC website, so everybody can watch it again. And that was all. Thank you so much. And I just want to thank all the presenters on behalf of the co-chairs and all the families that they are here tonight. This is an amazing session, so thank you. Thank you so much. And also to Stephanie Franklin from CPTA for doing an amazing presentation for us.
Thank you for thanking them on behalf of the co-chairs, and I will thank them as well, Stephanie, and all of the presenters on behalf of of Dr. Mason and myself and the Office of Special Education. Thank you all for being here this evening. And so I do want to give Sharon an opportunity to give any updates on what she has in store for the rec department. And then after she is done, we will turn it over to Connie to do the networking. I do understand that when I'm in communication with the co-chairs, that there are some folks who are not real comfortable asking some questions in the public setting, and they would prefer to funnel their questions to the co-chairs or to talk about them in the networking session. So what I've asked the co-chairs to do is to please take note of any of those questions that come up, and if they could share them with us, we will be sure to include those those responses in the communication back to the SEAC distribution group. So they will be doing that on behalf of us. So Sharon, if you want to go ahead and say a few words, and then we will turn it over to the networking.
That's great. And Connie, I share your enthusiasm because I was trying to type in the chat earlier, hey, I have some news, and the chat never works. So yay, the little victories in life when we get our stuff working. It's amazing. So hello all, I am Sharon Norcio with Montgomery County Recreation. We are very excited that Montgomery County Recreation is doing some Kids Day Out programming. And we are doing some of that in partnership with Montgomery County Public Schools. So we are working at some of the Title I community centers that are closest to the Title I schools. So those programs will be offered at a lower rate. Some of them, we are also working with school meals to be able to provide the nutrition program for youth. And on our November 4th date, which is our next full day programming, We will have 2 therapeutic recreation options for students and siblings who are in special education. The younger group is 6 to 12-year-old, and the group B is the 13 to 21-year-olds. So we will be providing a full day of programming at Bauer Drive Community Center, and that program will run from 8:30 to 4 p.m. And for the other kids who want that inclusive environment, we are offering those at many of our other centers. I did send the flyer over to Jen to be included with the minutes. And if you want other information, you can feel free to reach out to me or look on the rec department page. It is supposed to be coming out from I don't know, it's a Montgomery County Public School email in the next day or two. So we have had inquiries about, some of the upcoming school days off, and we are very excited to be offering this brand new option for us to be able to partner and make this happen. The second thing I wanted to share is that youth basketball registration is open, kindergarten on up. And for those folks who are not quite ready for leagues yet and may or may not understand league play, we do have a brand new variety of youth basketball clinics. We'll work on skills and drills and just basics of, dribbling and shooting and what the points and what the lines on the court are and things like that. And so no pressure there. It's just more of a fun and recreational option to be able to learn about basketball, but we also have youth basketball all the way up through age 18. That's my spiel for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. It's always so great to hear what's going on. And I know parents are very interested in that information. So thank you. At this time, we're going to turn it over to Connie. And once again, I'm going to say thank you to all the presenters and thank you to all the participants for being here this evening. We will see you in November. Actually, the agenda should have our next meeting date because I know we try to get a little, we have to work around the holiday. So we will pull up the agenda. Derek, do you have the agenda? We can just look at that.
The 18th, November 18th.
That November 18th. Thank you. I didn't have that on the tip of my tongue. November 18th. We will see you on the 18th. So until then, thank you all very much. Have a great evening.